We're going to move on now to Michael McCullough, who's a retired faculty member at Brooklyn College.
I'm going into share screen. Here we go. I think we got it.
Yeah, that's full.
Can you turn on your camera so we can
Oh,
see?
sorry. Did I disappear here? Yes, I did. Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to be participating in a conference that is tackling what I believe is the most revolutionary issue in science today, namely the prospect of integrating the physical with the human social sciences. And I'm especially happy to be part of a panel devoted to social and political thermodynamics. I only wish I could have participated in this sort of dialogue over 40 years ago when I first entertained the idea of linking politics and thermodynamics. As you see here, in 1977, I published an essay in which I stated, we may begin to speculate about the possible future development of a science of political thermodynamics. What got me thinking along these lines was living under a military dictatorship for 3 years in Brazil, where I went with the Peace Corps in 1968. I don't have time now to go into the chain of reasoning that led me from dictatorial politics in Brazil to thermodynamics, but I will present a parallel line of thought here when I interpret the oppressive culture of Jim Crow as a humanly stifling, equilibrium-oriented type of disorder. Suffice it to say for now that I put the idea of political thermodynamics on the back burners for many years and only returned to it in the past few years. My main focus now is a complexity theory of power. And for anyone who wants to take a look at that, I've posted several essays on this topic on ResearchGate. And given that we have, I hear participants from 22 countries outside the US, some of whom may not be familiar with the term Jim Crow, let me briefly describe its meaning. We mean here in this country that Jim Crow was a culture that violently oppressed African Americans, severely limiting their social, economic, and political options. It developed soon after the Civil War in the wake of the abolition of slavery and managed to impose itself for almost a century. The civil rights movement was the first sustained effort to uproot Jim Crow, and it succeeded in eradicating many of the most egregious practices, like requiring Blacks to sit in the back of public buses or to use racially segregated restrooms, hotels, and restaurants. Now, I'm a political scientist and by no means a physicist or thermodynamicist, but it appears to me that core thermodynamic concepts can help build a conceptual framework for the analysis of a broad range of conflicts in human affairs. The main concepts I use in this essay are equilibrium and non-equilibrium, self-organization and disorganization, and open and closed, emphasizing actual processes of organizing, disorganizing, opening, and closing. For those of you who may view these concepts only in quantitative or mathematical terms, please consider my use of these concepts political analogies of physical phenomena. But to make things interesting, I postulate that the politically organizing and processing that the politically organizing and disorganizing processes that I'm going to describe here are actually homologous to the system dynamics of prebiotic physical phenomena. I'm going to present conflicts at three different levels. The level of science, the level of politics, and finally at the historical concrete level of the civil rights movements, the civil rights movement's confrontation with Jim Crow in the 1950s and 1960s. At each level, there's a conflict between diametrically opposed versions of order associated with equilibrium on the one hand, and order that emerges from non-equilibrium on the other. I'm also going to introduce from a political science perspective notions of power that complement these conflicting views of order, and I'll go into that in a bit. Now, let me just, okay, now the clash of orders in science pits the Newtonian tradition of equilibrium-oriented order against the non-equilibrium view of order in nature that has emerged in relatively recent times out of complexity theory and open system thermodynamics. Fritjof Capra put it this way: the new perception of order and disorder represents an inversion of traditional scientific views. On the one hand, order is associated with equilibrium. On the other hand, non-equilibrium is a source of order. Now, in terms of the questioning Newtonian science, it's important to note that Newtonian science only clashes with the new science when it is applied beyond its proper domain. Newtonian methods are appropriate for two variable problems that could hold all other variables constant, but such problems apply to a limited, largely mechanical domain. The clash occurs when Newton's mechanical model is applied to all of nature, when that is, it becomes the clockwork universe. And that's where, instead of using the term mechanical, I use the term mechanistic as a term of criticism. In the mechanistic approach to science, all nature is a machine operating perfectly. It is a deus ex machina following absolutely certain laws. Disorder and uncertainty are anomalies because in an order that is perfect, there can be no disorder. Where certainty is absolute, there can be no uncertainty. Let me just fill out a little of this here. I've already talked about some of these things. But on the right-hand side, we see thermodynamics presents us with counter models of the clockwork universe, an equilibrium-oriented view of disorder for closed systems as stipulated by the second law, and a non-equilibrium approach to the emergence of order in open systems. In this view, perfect order and absolute certainty are unattainable. Uncertainty and disorder can be reduced, but never eliminated. Now, I also want to bring in the notion of power over and power with. These two concepts, I think, correspond with the notion of equilibrium politics and non-equilibrium politics that I'm going to propose soon. Power over is power exercised by one party over another. In the lingo of power theory, A over B, party A over party B. And whereas power with, this power over concept cannot take account of democratic empowerment. And for that, we need this other concept of power with. And in order to save time, let's not elaborate this more here. In making the transition to equilibrium and non-equilibrium politics, I'm simply inserting the word political wherever the words order and disorder appear. What remains is the same diametrical opposition between types of order and types of disorder. A, in this version of order, A exercises power over B. And from A's point of view, order ensues as long as B responds obediently and without question. Power imposed achieves a very real equilibrium-oriented order, but it is a mechanistic order. It is a mechanistic human order. It mechanizes human relationships. And let me also mention that power exercised this way is often exercised by physical force and more subtle ways of force. And I think that opens the door to some thermodynamic concepts. When A exercises power over B, B views this not as a type of order, but as a type of disorder. From the point of view of B, to be pressed toward equilibrium is the inverse of an orderly process. It is incapacitating and disorganizing. But from the view of A, the party imposing order, any autonomous action by B to question or disobey is to disrupt A's order, to generate disequilibrium and disorder. Now in the upper left corner, which I'm going to try and see better myself here, this is where power can be exercised mutually or collaboratively. From a complexity perspective, questioning or disobedience introduces, or may not always, but it sometimes introduces a bifurcation or power restructuring crisis whose end result, if B succeeds in exercising power on equal terms with A, is an enhanced state of self-organization. Now, in moving on to the clash of orders between the Jim Crow equilibrium and civil rights protesters, we place the view of the world of segregationists in this upper left corner from the perspective of those whites who believed in their racial superiority over blacks. The inequality evident in racial discrimination reflected an unquestionable natural order of things. And many religious views got involved in both in slavery and in racial segregation, with people finding things in the Bible that could both support slavery and oppose slavery. At this level, there's a color line, an absolute color line that cannot be crossed. And from the point of view of blacks who are subject to this type of imposed order, the experience is degrading. Civil rights activists denounced Jim Crow order as a type of disorder. And again, back from the viewpoint of those who imposed the segregated society, civil disobedience was a source of far from equilibrium disorder, triggering the punitive forces of Jim Crow. And up in the upper right corner, we see the various protest strategies created a bifurcation crisis. And there, I'm sure you know, I'm borrowing the language of Ilya Prigogine when I'm using the notion of bifurcation here, created a bifurcation crisis whose outcome was to open and socially democratize a closed system. With the passage of laws like the 1964 Civil Rights Act, participants in this conflict agreed upon new binding obligations. And I'm whizzing. How much time do I have, Blair?
3 minutes left until, but that's includes discussion time.
Okay, 3 minutes. So that also determines how much I can comment on these concluding thoughts. First of all, I'd just like to emphasize the importance of focusing on disorganization and disorganizing processes, as well as on the notion of self-organization.
Oh.
This self-organization concept is one that I think has produced a lot of excitement, but I think sometimes people get carried away with it and don't see that disorganization is a concept equally as important as self-organization. You really can't discuss one without the other. Another thing I'd like to comment on is that to pursue the kind of analysis I've taken, I would recommend use of transitional cases because they can employ the full breadth of thermodynamic concepts. What I'm referring to are like transitions from authoritarian rule to more open systems. Thermodynamically, we can go all the way from closed to open on that. And likewise, transitions where there's an authoritarian breakdown towards the breakdown of democratic systems and the rise of authoritarianism, going from open to closed systems. And finally, and this is a question that an entire other conference could be devoted to, and I think has, how can physical sciences address ethical issues? I'm just going to pose a number of more questions here. When we are able to describe certain phenomena as a politics of entropy, is nature providing us with signs or indicators of political disorder and political order? Can such indicators inform public policy? And I'm just going to leave these as open questions. And Blair, we can move on if there are any questions.
So we've got about a minute for questions.
Is that all?
Okay, can I make a small announcement, please?
Yeah.
Dr. William Lawless, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, you're in the wrong room. You're supposed to be in T10.
T10?
Yes, this is T11. So I will put a link in the chat, in the group chat. This is the link to T10. Please follow that link.
Group chat, okay.
I thought this 3 sessions was very enlightening and potentially very important. And I'd like to say I'm the editor of the journal Biophysical Economics and Sustainability, co-editor, and I would like to invite the 3 of you to write a piece, a paper or a commentary or something with a title something like, can thermodynamics contribute to understanding social, whatever the words are that you'd want to use? To get all of these ideas together in one place, I think would be a very exciting idea.
Okay, I think this next session has to get started.
Sorry if I used up too much of that for question and answer.